Hi, everybody. How are you getting on? I'm trying to see you. There you are. Right. Mike Butcher from TechCrunch. How are you? How's it all going? I haven't been to this venue before. It's very well set up, isn't it? We're going to talk, well, we've just had a speech there about big data. Now we're going to sort of unpack some of the themes. We'll do a little bit of geekery to begin with. Let me introduce my panel first of all. We've got James Kretchmar from the CTO of the EMEA CTO of Akamai Technologies, just here to my right. Next up, of course, you've just heard from Dongbai, the CTO of AliExpress. Do you know that they sell 100 million retail items on that website? Astounding. And then furthest away from me is Donal Byrne, who's the CEO, co-founder of Corvil, I believe. You are the co-founder, aren't you? Did you co-found it? Oh, no, you didn't. You're the CEO. I got it wrong. But based a Dubliner. And what we're going to sort of get into here, first of all, is talking about sort of infrastructure. Obviously Akamai is extremely well known for that. And if you want to talk about big data, you also got to talk about the enormous amounts of data flows that go across the internet at this point. And it's worth reminding ourselves how big this is. And I was just reading, actually, that you guys just released some data, actually, along the lines of that, I think it was your annual report, that DDoS attacks greater than 100 gigabits a second increased by 140% in the fourth quarter of 2016, with 10 attacks surpassing 300 gigabits a second in the year overall, which was, now, it's beautiful, getting back to the old why we're here, that's an astounding figure, and it does really produce the sort of implication that when you were talking about big data and the enormous amounts of traffic flows across the internet now, you're also talking about enormous potential threats as well. And I'd quite like to unpack briefly why you think threats can be part of this discussion about big data.
Sure, absolutely. I think the threat landscape is one where big data, first, the attacks themselves are huge. So if you want to think of big data that way, it's just a lot of data.
But most of them are actually sourcing from the US, apparently.
Yeah, so the source of the attacks actually is something to be careful about. We talk about it a lot, but it's less to do with sort of the nation or the nationality of the individuals, and more to do with where there's good connectivity to attack from and where there's vulnerable servers. So the bad guys, they look for vulnerable servers wherever they can get them, and if those servers are well connected to the internet, they're more effective tools for taking something offline. So the sources, they vary over time, but what's clear is they're looking for the malicious stuff. Now, one way big data can come to play here is in analyzing that traffic to understand where are people looking for what types of vulnerabilities. One thing we did with the large record-breaking attack last year, the 620 gigabit per second attack from IoT devices, the Mirai botnet attack, is we used...
That's when people's kettles were contributing and things like that. Wi-Fi enabled light bulbs.
We've had that. In that particular case, it was mostly DVRs and security cameras, but we've also seen the coffee makers. That's happening too.
DVRs, right.
Yeah. And so, in terms of big data, one thing we did after that attack is we went back and looked at some of our large data collections and used big data techniques to understand what was the actual evolution of that botnet. And we can see now that there were early stages earlier in the year in the summer where people were probing for devices, had prototype versions of that botnet that they were trying to stand up. So big data, one piece there is being one step ahead, we hope, of the threats, or at least being able to analyze them in real time.
And is that something you guys experience at AliExpress, that kind of attack?
We actually, fortunately, sits behind actually one of their services, so we're actually less vulnerable. So typically it's the forefront that's get attacked first.
I see. Right. What I want to, but Donal, you're an observer of this space. How relevant is it to talk about this subject in terms of, because really, in a way, to me, it splits between big companies who have big data and startups who don't and are trying to access it. And is it really a relevant discussion in terms of how startups behave compared to really large corporates?
Well, I think firstly, I would say that our involvement in the world of big data is really through our customers. And sorry,
yeah.
I think I'm live.
You can start that sentence again if you like.
Yeah, so just to give you a perspective, our involvement in big data technology is really through our customers, and our most, I would say, pressing customers are the large financial markets customers, so the largest banks in the world, the largest exchanges in the world. And they're challenged with two major problems. One is, well, beyond how do they make money, they leverage a lot of technology to create efficient processes by which either they trade or they make barter. But now we have a challenge of both performance and cybersecurity at the same time. And one of the great challenges we have in the global financial markets is the threat of cyber attack. And so people are looking to big data as a potential answer for that, but in our experience, and it's quite extensive because we build the machine that watches over the machines that trades the world's financial markets. And the problem that we have is that space has fundamentally evolved to allow machines to trade autonomously on behalf of those businesses, and things are only getting faster and smarter. And so you may have heard of the term high-frequency trading. It's basically the idea that we can allow machines to trade 1 million times faster than humans. And so as you can imagine, data volumes and data speed and the velocity of that data has really gone gangbusters. And it really has far surpassed most of the big data technologies that have been used for, well, not that purpose. And so the great challenge that I see in the world of cybersecurity as it relates to financial markets is that it's not that we're looking for a needle in the haystack, it's that we're looking for the needle that's going at the speed of light in the world's haystacks. And that's what I see as the big challenge.
I love that analogy, that's excellent. At Akamai, you guys are dealing with enormous amounts of data flows. To speak to that issue, you know, the internet really wasn't built for this at all. I mean, it was built for sending small amounts of texts and tiny little pings between servers across the ARPANET back in the day. Do you see that being able to be improved by, say, IPv6 in the next couple of years? Do you see that coming through? Can you give us a minute's heads up on whether or not the infrastructure providers can deal with this?
Well, you know, the infrastructure of the internet, it's true that it's not designed for the type of experiences people want today, right? Really high reliability, high quality experiences. The original builders never imagined today's use cases. So one of the ways in which big data can come to play to help the situation, because without it, right, we would be lost. You would be having very bad experiences all the time. One thing we do is constantly measure the performance of the entire internet. So we're actually figuring out what are the fastest paths from A to B. That's a huge math problem when you think about how big the internet is. So there's a real big data problem there about how to reduce that down and work with it and get answers very, very quickly to be very responsive on that. That helps make the internet infrastructure work.
Now, you've got a view, haven't you, Dongbai, about where the next generation of big data startups are going to come from, and you were telling me about how your views on TensorFlow from Google. You want to expand on that?
Oh yeah, and I actually think, I mean not specifically on TensorFlow, but rather I think there are a number of open source attempts, and also because of recent, this is tremendous media exposure because of the AlphaGo did for the Go win against human, right? So those media give it such a halo that I think there will actually not, it's by itself, but it will arouse a huge interest from both industry as well as actually next generation or new blood or next generation programmers, right? And I think that would actually fuel a tremendous growth in the coming, I would say, 10 years. It's going to be the AI around big data would tremendously change. And then today, I think it's still much of a continuation of what the research has done in the past 10 years.
Donal, where do you think the next generation of companies in this space will come from?
Well, I think the really successful ones are the ones that we don't see coming, but that's typically entrepreneurship. I think what you can do is try to look at where are the big problems coming, and there are some pretty massive ones about to happen. So I feel that in the work that we have done, we've been beamed into the future maybe 5 or 6 years because we got a chance to work with some of the crazy guys in the world of autonomous algorithmic trading. And from our experience in doing that, we would be of the view that every single buy-sell process is going to become autonomous and algorithmic within a short period of time. And so even I noticed your data on the web pages, which I thought was very insightful, but the fact is that web pages are going to be eliminated because we'll have pretty much autonomous machines doing our bidding on our behalf. They will change, they will evolve. And so it's not that we'll be loading web pages, it's that we'll have bots that basically will buy your tickets autonomously, give you best prices. You will be going into restaurants, and we will have dynamic pricing on the menus. And that will be all driven by a dynamic marketplace where we will have algorithms and autonomous machines controlling that. And so that can be all good, but it can also be disastrous if we don't have a way of monitoring, controlling, surveying, governing, and securing those infrastructures. And so I see the next big wave as that intersect between the enablement and the protection and governance. And so the companies, massive amount of companies will come in and play in those areas.
James, you typically, Akamai would monitor live streams and, the World Cup and what have you. But you must be seeing a rise in bot traffic now as well. Not just when I say bot traffic, I don't mean attacks on security systems, etc. What I mean is rise of AI-driven bots to do people's work effectively. And now there's lots to talk about in the startup world around chatbots being the new app and things like that. Do you see that? How fundamentally different do you think that is, or do you think it's just going to be more of the same in terms of the way you see the world?
No, you're right. I mean, bots are clearly a trend and a growing, it's an area where it's interesting because we tend to think bot and then not think that behind it there's this ecosystem of good bots and bad bots and maybe in the middle bots. So, some bots, the search crawlers, right? Google's doing the world some good by its bots. And if you're a site owner, boy, you want that bot to work. But then other bots are trying to scrape prices off of your site in order to get something out of that, or worse, are trying to probe for vulnerabilities. So I agree, we're going to see a lot more bots in the future. It's going to be doing a lot more sophisticated things, some good, some not good. The challenge is going to be, and it also ties back to big data, figuring out a classification. What's a good bot? What's a bad bot? What's good or bad for me? And then understanding over time, as these develop, what is it that this request is coming at me? How do I deal with that and know what it is?
The big challenge, Mike, is going to be distinguishing between intentionally bad bots and unintentionally bad bots. That's a really tricky one. I mean, we had an example.
So a bot that was meant to do well but ends up doing harm.
Well, the challenge is that there's probably plenty of software developers and technologists in the audience here, and we all know that technology can have flaws and can have unintended consequences. And as you speed up and you make things smarter and you turn over more autonomy to technology, we can have unintended consequences. And that can appear as same symptoms as a denial of service attack. We had an example of a company about 2 years ago, Night Capital in New York City, where basically a machine spun up, a VM machine spun up, started trading. Everyone thought it was turned off, and basically traded them out of existence in 20 minutes. Created a debt of 430 million, and that company was done the following morning. That
Right.
would be unintentionally bad.
The bright new future, isn't it, everyone? So exciting.
Yeah.
The sunlit up hills of the wonderful future we've got. Speaking of attacks, your newest data center is in Moscow, isn't it? AliExpress?
Yes, we are. We are actually building a data center in Moscow. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Have you seen any traffic from Moscow lately? From Akamai?
Oh, we do have traffic from Moscow. Yes,
You do?
We do, and
Right.
actually quite dramatic. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to hear.
In fact, what's interesting is we not only does, I mean, a lot of people think e-commerce and then they always think a way that taking the offline traffic online, but clearly e-commerce is actually starting to steering the other way. Is to actually unite the online traffic with offline traffic, and we're seeing some interesting use cases that does both.
Let's in the closing minutes. Let's do some future gazing then. Right. So, is this world going to be open to new innovators, or do the big guys win? Question one. Question two. Who are the platforms that win in this space? Is it something that you can innovate on, or is it something that really you just have to have enormous amount of access to enormous amounts of data to actually win in this space? And this actually leads really into ultimately being able to produce the next wave of artificial intelligence, because you've got to have, in order to have an AI, you've got to have built it upon enormous amounts of data. Do you not think? What do you think, James?
Well, I think one of the struggles is you have a big mass of data like we do, right? And imagine I talked about in my talk the hits that we're serving for end user traffic, 40 million hits a second, 30 terabits a second. But you think on the other side of that, right, is the telemetry data that comes back in, the log data. So on the one hand, you're saying, is it only the people that have these big masses of data that are going to win? But the challenge, regardless, is what do you do with all that data, right? That's the trick. How do you pare it down to something useful? So I think there'll be a lot of room for innovation in how to work with those big masses of data to get something effective out of it, to notice something you might not have realized was effective, and to put that data to good use.
How are you guys innovating at AliExpress? Are you going to be getting into crazy areas like quantum computing or what?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting when you bring up whether it's the big guy win or a smaller, newer technology will come in. And there's actually two trends. From the big guy's perspective, and you can clearly say that people are driving the essentially arms race higher and higher, and we're starting to materialize smaller and smaller business opportunities, very transient opportunities. It comes in the moment user intention start to display a little bit of hint, and you try to materialize on it, right? And that clearly requires huge investment, and I would imagine big guys has advantage over it. Whereas on the other hand, I think we're still human beings. We still act more in a way that we're interested by really, really novel things. I think there is a huge opportunity for newer ways to think of not so much big data, but newer ways of thinking user experience.
Donal, what's your view on who wins in space?
Yeah, to get back to your original question, Mike, I think it's the most fascinating time ever. And I think it's probably, we were speaking earlier before we came out on stage where, I was a young engineer and went to Silicon Valley in '94 before the whole internet bubble thing and lived that out in its fullest. And at the time, I was a young Dublin engineering student thinking that the only place you could do a good startup and innovate and succeed was in Silicon Valley. That's no longer the case. It is just a fascinating time that we've never seen an evolution in technology as to what's about to happen in the next 10 years. And the most amazing thing ever is that if you have a good idea, you can go disrupt from any place in the world. What AWS has provided, and the cloud providers, you can instantly spin up 1,000 machines and try out your idea. And there's no blockage to you innovating. And there are so many problems that are out there, and there are so many problems that are about to emerge that I just wish I was 20 years old again. It's just a fascinating time. I would greatly encourage everyone in the audience to make take full advantage of it.
Well, of course, you can spin up AWS servers from anywhere, but you can't spin up venture capital funding from anywhere. That's the other issue.
Yeah, but there's more capital chasing bad ideas than I've ever seen before.
There's a lot of that going on.
There's a lot of that. If you have a good idea, there's money out there to back it.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much to my panel for having a little chat about that discussion, that subject, and thank you very much for listening. See you later.
Thank you.